Let me ask you a question. What happens when your country's primary export is its people?
My first 3 months when I was here, uh, because we already see our situation there. Actually, in one accommodation, in one room, we are like 20 or 30.
That's Zelda, an OFW who spent some time in the Middle East, and her story is one of exploitation and triumph.
They are allowing us to go outside when we are only going to the office. If you are not going to the office, you've been locked in that accommodation. There are some who are, they are their phones. They didn't give that to the agency because they are confiscating. When I decided to be an OFW, I see same situation. There are many migrant workers here that are asking for help, but they are not giving them. They are not assisting them. What should be the government to be done? They are just, they are just only. They are using us as a milking cow.
She's just one of millions of Filipinos who find themselves having to work abroad. This happens because of the Filipinos government's dependence on sending their own citizens overseas to work. And while many countries send their citizens to work abroad, none have built political and economic structures around sending their citizens abroad the way that the Philippines has. So how did the Philippines find itself here? What's the history behind the growth of overseas Filipino workers, and more importantly, what allows it to persist until today? For many Filipinos, overseas work can seem like a fact of life, a necessity to survive given the job availabilities domestically. But we shouldn't forget that not so long ago, sending Filipinos to work abroad was merely a stopgap measure. Now, what is a stopgap measure? Stopgap measures are usually just temporary solutions to very urgent problems. Take this for an example. The power went out in your neighborhood, but you still have some work to get done, so you can just use a candle, right? To light your way, to do very menial things, but you can't expect to live on candles forever. And in the 1970s, this was the situation that the Filipino economy found itself in. Under Ferdinand Marcos, the economy was tanking. Foreign debt was growing, unemployment was rising, and the country was having balance of payment issues. Now, if you're like me, you don't quite know what balance of payment means. It simply describes how much money is going in and out of a country. And in 1969, a lot of money was leaving the Philippines. This happened because Ferdinand Marcos wanted to win his second election. And his solution to this was to spend about $50 million on infrastructure projects. Now, on the surface, this looks good. More roads, public buildings, but under the surface, the Philippines government was running low on its cash reserves. And here is where OFWs come in. First of all, they help solve the balance of payment crises because they're sending money home in the form of remittances. They also help relieve unemployment numbers when the domestic Filipino economy can't offer jobs. The first OFW workers found themselves in the Middle East, whose newly found oil reserves were funding large development projects that required engineers and construction workers. And this initial wave of OFWs worked so well that in 1974, the Filipino government mandated one of its agencies to promote and develop more ways to send Filipinos abroad. And while in other countries, remittances help balance out things like foreign direct investments, the Philippine economy was only falling into deeper and deeper debt. The country was being plundered by Marcos and his cronies, who kept stumbling from bailout to bailout and stashing their money in secret overseas banks. In fact, starting 1982, Marcos was mandating that overseas workers send 50 to 70% of their earnings back home by presidential decree. This continued right up until the People's Power Revolution ousted him from office and he fled the country. But that's the thing about systematic problems. Even after Marcos leaves, the next government would only inherit this vicious cycle that continues to entrench the exploitation of overseas workers. As the construction boom in the Middle East ends, the feminization of overseas work occurs. This is when the number of women working overseas begins to outpace the men.
Going abroad is always an option now because the government is only, they are introducing this, the labor export program. Go abroad, you can have the money there. At first, it is really my problem when I was here because my experience, I was a victim of human trafficking actually. Just like, a prostitute. We are falling line, waiting for the employer to choose you. It depends on how you perform. We are locked in room. They are confiscating our phones. They are not allowing us to contact our family in the Philippines to let them know our situations. If we didn't do the trial, there is no food.
Due to the high barriers and complexity to international migration, companies get to charge exorbitant fees to OFWs and entrap them in debt. Rising in prominence in the 1990s, these recruitment agencies can charge from $1,000 up to $5,000 in fees, trapping workers and their families in debt despite legislation existing to protect them from that exact practice. And the dark truth of it all is that the government doesn't prosecute these cases or care much about the conditions that these OFWs live under. Of course, to compensate for this, they often spin wild and patriotic tales of national heroes who go abroad to help their families at great personal cost.
I think the grain of truth is that there is an element of sacrifice in being an OFW. You are leaving your family and friends behind, adjusting to a new environment, among others, and that OFWs contribute a lot to the Philippine economy.
That's Teo Marasigan, and his research is what inspired this explainer.
At the same time, it downplays the Philippine state's role in labor migration. So it makes it appear that labor migration is just a natural thing to do. This is interesting because it is also used to encourage Filipinos to leave the country. So it's a natural thing to do, but actually it is the government encouraging the people to leave.
We need to understand that when a country relies so heavily on exporting its own citizens, this causes shifts in the political, economic, and social landscape of the country. Now, some of these changes are deliberate, and some of them are also the result of vicious cycles that the Philippines continues to find itself in. Now, when your priorities are to send your citizens abroad to work, you're incentivized to send the very best and brightest. Now, this is because you have to compete with workers from other countries, and you don't want to jeopardize the steady flow of remittances. But this also means that none of the Philippines' best workers are actually left back home. Those who would benefit the countries the most, those who would push the country forward, are actually too busy working for jobs abroad. And this leaves a stunted domestic economy. And it's not just that. These workers often find themselves in overqualified positions. Doctors become nurses, teachers become caregivers, and engineers become construction workers, which means they're not getting full returns on their education and their training. Now, the objectives of education also end up shifting. Technical and vocational fields end up outranking fields like social and political thought. Not to mention that institutions will look at global trends and foreign demands for what they should be teaching in their institutions, as opposed to looking at what fields the Philippines itself actually needs. And this is a huge part of the story. The Filipino government only stands to benefit from this phenomenon. As it and other stakeholders continue to gain from it, they entrench it further.
Actually, there's more of a consensus among scholars that labor export is not sustainable, but this is not reflected in government policies. How does the government justify this? I'm thinking, actually, they don't. They just encourage. They think that now it's like a natural thing to do. It is so deeply ingrained that they don't have to justify it. It's just, the way things are. And and creating jobs at home is not something they think about.
And remember when we were talking about OFWs relieving economic troubles in the Philippines? Well, the other form of relief that we haven't quite measured yet is socio-political relief. Any potential unrest that can arise from poverty, unemployment, and other negative effects of the economic crisis are exported as well. They become the burden of OFWs and their host countries instead of the Filipino government itself. And we should note that once these OFWs arrive in their receiving countries, they exist in this weird in-between state. While they're fully participating in the economic activity of their host countries, they don't get the same benefits as full citizens. They get lesser wages, and moreover, these workers don't enjoy the same worker protections as full citizens of that country.
It is really sad on my part when we cannot provide more of what is they are needing. The assistance that the government failed to provide. It's like, it is really sad when some of those victims refuse to fight their right because they are fear they might end up, to become worse if they will still continue fighting. It is really, it is very hard. And it really, I am very angry. I cannot do anything. Only just to give them some advices. To do like this, to go with these agencies. To tell them that as the government, when in my, in my own opinion, the government doesn't care.
The Philippines government treats overseas work like it's a necessary evil, even going as far as to promote it as a cornerstone of the Filipino economy. And when they charge proudly into these situations, it falls on people like Zelda to care and protect for these exploited workers.
We are building community of Filipino people here that will to demand the improvement of working conditions, the living wage, our right in everything here. Hopefully, we this our initiative will gain more support to expose, the worsening situations of this the effect of this labor policy that the government is imposing us, and hope if we can build more, more organizations that fighting for the right and welfare of migrant Filipino workers. I think it will help a lot because you cannot fight alone.
And here, Zelda highlights the importance of collective action. Many countries that host OFWs have measures in place to hamper and stop initiatives like the one Zelda works for. On the other hand, her efforts alone aren't enough to stop the disease to which overseas work is merely a symptom of: the economic mismanagement of the Philippines. A lot of the burden of this falls on the Philippines government to take the necessary measures and provide domestic jobs for Filipinos. This is why amplifying the voices of OFWs is so important. The Philippines government needs to know that this isn't a problem they can just sweep under the rug. The people deserve to know when their country is run on exploitation.